Have you ever stopped and asked yourself why you keep attracting the same kind of toxic people? No matter how much you promise yourself, things will be different next time. Why the faces change, the names change, but the emotional pattern remains identical. Like you're stuck repeating the same painful story over and over again. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, then stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand something most people never figure out about themselves. And trust me, once you unlock this, your relationships, past, present, and future, will finally make sense. Before we go deeper, make sure you subscribe to Hidden Mind Patterns, because the kind of insight you're about to hear is exactly the type of knowledge that can change the course of your life. Now, let's begin. You don't attract toxic people because you enjoy chaos, or because you naive, or because you unlucky. You attract toxic people because a part of your subconscious mind is trying to repeat an emotional pattern that you never knew was running the show. Most people don't realize that the mind is not attracted to what is healthy. It is attracted to what is familiar. And that single truth explains the majority of repeated toxic relationships. Think about the first emotional environment you grew up in. Your childhood wasn't just a collection of memories. It was the blueprint your subconscious created for what love, attention, and connection are supposed to feel like. Whether your childhood was chaotic or calm, harsh or nurturing, consistent or unpredictable, your mind internalized it as your emotional normal. So if you grew up around emotional instability, your nervous system learned to expect it. If you were raised with inconsistent affection, your brain learned to chase it. If you experienced criticism, manipulation, or emotional neglect, your internal blueprint may have mistakenly fused discomfort with connection. This is why, as an adult, when someone walks into your life exhibiting similar emotional patterns, maybe they give you mixed signals, maybe they disappear and return unpredictably, maybe they criticize you subtly. Maybe they love bomb you with intensity. The logical part of your mind might feel cautious, but the deeper, older part of your mind feels something unexpected. It feels familiar. And to the subconscious, familiarity feels safe, even if it's toxic. That's the part most people never understand. You're not drawn to toxic people because they're good for you. You're drawn to them because they resemble emotional experiences you've been conditioned to accept. It feels like home, not because home was peaceful, but because it was familiar. Another hidden truth is that your mind is constantly searching for emotional closure. If you didn't receive healthy love, your subconscious tries to recreate similar relationships in adulthood because it hopes that this time you'll fix it. You'll win approval, you'll finally be chosen, you'll finally be enough. The mind believes that if it can repair the old wound through a new person, the pain will disappear. So it unconsciously attracts partners or friends or people who embody similar emotional traits as those who hurt you, hoping the new outcome will heal the old story. But instead of healing, you end up reliving the same wound again and again. Not because you're weak, but because your subconscious is trying to correct the past without your permission. This cycle becomes even stronger if your self-worth wasn't fully developed. If you grew up feeling unseen, unimportant, or emotionally responsible for others, you may find yourself automatically overgiving, over-explaining, or over-accommodating. Toxic people are magnetically drawn to individuals like this because you offer something they crave: stability, empathy, emotional labor, and forgiveness. They sense you'll give them more chances than they deserve. They sense you will excuse their behavior. They sense your compassion, your patience, your desire to fix or heal. What's painful is that the very qualities that make you a good person can also make you vulnerable to people who take advantage of those qualities. And here is something most content creators want to tell you. If you consistently attract emotionally unavailable people, there's a strong possibility that a part of you is emotionally unavailable too. This doesn't mean you don't want love or connection. It means that somewhere deep inside, you fear it. You've redrawn to people who are difficult to connect with because they make you feel safe from the true vulnerability that healthy relationships require. With toxic people, you're busy chasing them, fixing them, or deciphering them. That chase becomes a distraction from having to face your own emotional wounds. It's easier to obsess over someone who treats you inconsistently than to confront the parts of yourself that you've been avoiding for years. Another overlooked reason you attract toxic people is because you are conditioned to ignore red flags. Not because you didn't see them, but because your brain normalized them. If you grew up around yelling, chaos might not alarm you. If you grew up around emotional manipulation, guilt may feel like affection. If you grew up around inconsistency, emotional push-pull might feel like passion. When someone treats you poorly early on, your brain dismisses it. Not out of denial, but out of familiarity. You mistake intensity for connection. You mistake anxiety for chemistry. You mistake inconsistency for excitement. The body learns to associate emotional turbulence with love, so calmness feels foreign. Someone genuine might even feel boring or suspicious because they don't activate the emotional roller coaster your nervous system has adapted to. And for those who identify as empaths or deeply sensitive individuals, you may attract toxic people because you understand emotions so deeply that you feel compelled to heal others. You might see potential where others see danger. You might see a wounded inner child where others see manipulation. You might give someone the benefit of the doubt, even after they show patterns of selfishness or disrespect. You believe you can help. You believe you can change them. But toxic people don't want change. They want control. And your empathy makes you the perfect match for someone who thrives on emotional power. This is why the same toxic patterns appear again and again. Because you've been trained to nurture others at the expense of yourself. Now let us talk about a psychological mechanism that explains the entire cycle. Unresolved trauma creates repetition. When you have an emotional wound, be it rejection, abandonment, betrayal, or neglect, that wound becomes a magnet. Not a metaphorical one, a neurological one. Your unconscious mind seeks out situations that resemble the original wound because it's trying to rewrite the outcome. But toxic people don't rewrite the past, they reenact it. The mind says, maybe this time I won't be abandoned. Maybe this time I will be enough. Maybe this time someone will choose me. But toxic people don't choose you, they choose what benefits them. And instead of healing, you end up reinforcing the wound. This creates a toxic loop of emotional familiarity, self-abandonment, and subconscious repetition. And every loop makes the pattern stronger. But here's the most important thing. You can break this pattern. You can stop attracting toxic people. You can shift your emotional blueprint. The moment you recognize that these patterns are not destiny, they are programming, you begin to take back power. Healing begins when you stop blaming yourself for the people you attract and start understanding the root cause behind your attractions. You didn't choose toxic people. Your unhealed wounds did. Your subconscious patterns did. Your inner child did. And now, as an adult, you have the power to choose again. You break the pattern not by forcing toxic people away, but by healing the parts of you that resonate with them. You raise your self-worth. You strengthen your boundaries. You learn what calmness feels like. You develop emotional clarity. You stop trying to fix people who are committed to their chaos. You stop mistaking inconsistency for love. You stop abandoning yourself for the comfort of familiar pain. As your inner world changes, your outer world follows. When peace becomes your normal, chaos becomes unattractive. When emotional safety becomes your baseline, red flags become impossible to ignore. When self-love becomes rooted in your identity, toxic people stop seeing you as a target. They feel the lack of access. They feel the lack of permission. The old pattern dies because you no longer participate in it. You are not cursed. You are not doomed. You are not broken. You're simply carrying emotional programming you never asked for. And now that you're aware of it, you have the power to rewrite the story. Once you begin to understand the emotional blueprint behind why you attract toxic people, something inside you starts to shift. The world doesn't magically change overnight, but your perception does. The things that once felt magnetic begin to feel suspicious. The people who once drew you in with intensity begin to feel draining. The patterns you once thought were coincidences suddenly reveal themselves as predictable, repetitive cycles shaped by old wounds. And in that moment of awareness, you begin to see something you may have never realized before. The problem was never that you met toxic people. The real issue was that you were conditioned to tolerate them, excuse them, and sometimes even confuse them for love. But awareness doesn't just open your eyes. It forces you to confront the internal conflicts you've been avoiding for years. The real transformation starts when you ask yourself, what part of me believes this is the best I can get? That's a deeper question than most people are willing to face. Because it requires confronting the parts of yourself that still hold on to pain, rejection, or emotional hunger from the past. Healing is not simply about changing your behavior. It's about changing the parts of your identity that formed in environments where your needs weren't met. It's about understanding that your attraction to toxic people was not your choice. It was your wounded self trying to survive, trying to be loved, trying to be seen. When you recognize that, you stop blaming yourself for the past and start taking responsibility for the future. But breaking the cycle isn't as simple as saying, I will no longer attract toxic people. The truth is, patterns don't disappear through force. They dissolve through healing and awareness. You have to become conscious of the emotional states that kept you connected to unhealthy people. For example, if you have always been the fixer, the caretaker, the emotional anchor for others, you need to understand why that role feels so natural. Maybe, for most of your life, your value was tied to what you could do for others. Maybe you learned that love had to be earned through effort, sacrifice, or emotional labor. And so, without realizing it, you gravitated toward people who needed fixing because it made you feel necessary. But the more you heal, the more you understand that real love is not built on rescue missions. Real love doesn't require you to carry someone else's emotional weight or sacrifice your peace to keep someone else stable. As you continue to unravel these patterns, you begin to see how they show up in your everyday interactions. You start noticing how quickly you forgive red flags, how often you downplay your needs, how instinctively you justify someone's harmful behavior. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. That's where the shift begins. Not enforcing new behaviors, but in understanding the old ones so deeply that they no longer control you. This is the stage where you start to detach emotionally from the people who drain you. It might feel unfamiliar at first, even uncomfortable, because your nervous system is used to the roller coaster. Peace feels boring. Consistency feels suspicious. Kindness feels unreal. But with time, these new emotional experiences begin to rewire your nervous system, teaching you that safety is not a trap, calmness is not a threat, and genuine affection is not manipulation in disguise. Healing also requires looking at the version of yourself who tolerated toxic behavior and offering that version compassion, not shame. Shame keeps the cycle alive. Compassion breaks it. Compassion says, you did what you needed to survive with the emotional skills you had at the time. When you approach yourself with understanding instead of judgment, you start to reclaim the parts of your identity that were lost in past relationships. You begin to rediscover your preferences, your boundaries, your needs, your values. Toxic relationships often overshadow those things because you become so focused on managing someone else's emotions that you forget your own. Healing creates space for you to reconnect with who you are without the influence of someone else's chaos. As you grow, you begin to attract different types of people. Not because the world changed, but because your inner world no longer sends out the same signals. You stop resonating with emotional inconsistency. You lose interest in people who create confusion. You become bored by unhealthy dynamics. What once felt exciting now feels exhausting. And what once felt dull now feels grounding, safe, and meaningful. That's how you know the blueprint is changing. You start choosing differently, not out of fear, but out of clarity. But healing also requires honesty. Honesty about your patterns. Honesty about why you stayed in situations that hurt you. Honesty about what you ignored because you feared losing the connection. Many people stay in toxic relationships because loneliness feels more terrifying than mistreatment. But loneliness is not a curse. It's a space where you rediscover your identity. It's a space where you learn to regulate your emotions without depending on someone else's unpredictable behavior. As you become more emotionally self-sufficient, toxic people lose their power over you. They cannot manipulate you when you no longer seek external validation. They cannot control you when you no longer fear abandonment. They cannot use silence or inconsistency as tools when you know your worth. You also begin to recognize that the love you've been searching for from others is actually something you've been withholding from yourself. Many people believe they need a partner to feel complete, but the truth is, you need a healed relationship with yourself before you can experience a healthy relationship with anyone else. When you treat yourself with respect, you naturally reject disrespect. When you validate your own feelings, you no longer crave validation from someone who withholds it. When you trust yourself, you stop trying to earn the trust of those who manipulate your emotions. As your relationship with yourself strengthens, your standards become effortlessly higher. Not rigid, not demanding, but based on self-awareness and self-respect. Eventually, you reach a point where your past no longer defines your attractions. The emotional patterns that once controlled your life lose their grip. You meet someone who treats you well, and instead of feeling suspicious, you feel calm. You meet someone consistent, and instead of losing interest, you grow closer. You meet someone emotionally available, and instead of running, you feel safe. This is the moment when healing becomes real. Not because toxic people no longer exist, but because you no longer choose them. But here, as the truth most people say out loud, healing is not linear. There will be moments where you feel tempted by old patterns. There will be moments where someone toxic appears charming again. There will be moments where loneliness whispers to you, asking you to settle for less. And when that happens, you must remind yourself that your future is not built on familiar pain. It is built on new choices, new standards, and new emotional experiences. You must remind yourself that you are no longer the version of you who accepted the bare minimum. You must remind yourself that you deserve love rooted in respect, consistency, kindness, and emotional security. The deeper you heal, the clearer your intuition becomes. Toxic people become easy to spot. Their patterns no longer confuse you. Their behavior is predictable. What used to pull you in now repels you. You stop trying to fix people who don't want to be fixed. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop making excuses for people who show you who they are the first time. You stop engaging in emotional battles that drain your energy. You stop sacrificing your needs for people who would never do the same for you. And then something beautiful happens. You begin attracting relationships that reflect your healing. You attract people who communicate clearly. You attract people who value your time and your boundaries. You attract people who support your growth instead of triggering your wounds. You attract people who make you feel safe, respected, and appreciated. These connections feel different, not because they are perfect, but because they are healthy. And healthy relationships are built not on intensity, but on consistency. Not on chaos, but on clarity. Not on toxic cycles, but on mutual emotional maturity. As you continue to grow and evolve, you realize that the journey was never about avoiding toxic people. It was about becoming someone who no longer entertains them. It was about creating a life where your emotional well-being is protected. It was about learning to love yourself enough to walk away from anything that threatens your peace. It was about discovering that the greatest form of love you can give yourself is choosing relationships that align with your healed identity, not your wounded past. And now, if you're listening to this, it means you're ready. You're ready to break the cycle. You're ready to rewrite your story. You're ready to step into a version of yourself who no longer attracts chaos, but invites peace. A version of yourself who no longer seeks validation, but recognizes your own worth. A version of yourself who chooses clarity, emotional security, and genuine connection. So here is your moment. Here is your turning point. Here is your chance to step out of the pattern and into a new chapter of your life. If you're ready to continue this journey, if you're ready to understand the hidden patterns of your mind, and if you're ready to finally reclaim control over your emotional world, then make sure you subscribe to Hidden Mind Patterns right now. This is not just a channel. This is your space for transformation, insight, and psychological awakening. Click subscribe, stay with us, and let's continue rewriting your story, one layer of the mind at a time.